Hello, today we will present a case analysis on Starbucks failure in Australia, a strategic misreading where global success collided with local reality, and Jason will begin with the case overview.
At first glance, Starbucks' failure in Australia appears surprising. Australia is a wealthy economy with one of the most developed coffee culture in the world. However, this case is not about a lack of demand for coffee. It is about how a multinational corporations misread a local market despite its global success. Starbucks is a United States-based multinational corporation that expanded internationally using a highly standardized business model. By the late 1990s, this model had been successfully replicated across many global markets, creating strong confidence in its, transferability. Starbucks entered Australia in the year of 2000 and expanded rapidly. By 2008, the company operated 87 stores across the country. Oh, this expansion strategy prioritized speed and scale rather than a gradual market adaptation. The core challenge Starbucks faced was strategic failure to localize. Management assumed that a global successful, standardized model could be directly applied to Australia without sufficient adjustments to local culture, consumer behavior, and communications practices. These strategic assumptions became the foundations of Starbucks' difficulties in Australia. Aisha Zara will now explain how Starbucks' reliance on standardizations rather than localizations contributed directly to this failure.
Building on Jason's identification of Starbucks' core strategic problem, this failure can be explained through Starbucks' standardization-led globalization strategy. Starbucks expanded internationally by replicating its U.S. business model, including store layout, menu structure, service style, and brand positioning. This approach prioritized global consistency and operational efficiency, which is often effective in markets where cafe culture is less developed. However, this strategy resulted in low local responsiveness because most strategic decisions were centralized at headquarters rather than adapted to local market conditions. In Australia, this became a major issue because the cafe market was already highly mature and competitive. Customers placed strong value on espresso quality, skilled baristas, and distinctive cafe identities. Due to its heavy reliance on standardization, Starbucks lacked the strategic flexibility needed to respond to these expectations. The company did not sufficiently adapt its offerings or overall cafe experience to suit the local context. Therefore, the failure in Australia was not simply caused by cultural differences, but by a strategic mismatch in which Starbucks' standardization strategy directly produced a failure to localize, leading to weak market acceptance. This strategic failure to localize then manifested as an intercultural mismatch in how Starbucks communicated and interacted with Australian customers, which leads into Aina's analysis of the cultural dimension of this failure.
Hello, I'm Aina Humaira. Today I'll be talking about Starbucks' failure in Australia was not only strategic but also an intercultural communication failure. In the United States, Starbucks operates using a low context communication style. The brand relies on clear, standardized messages, scripted service, and efficiency. Coffee is communicated primarily as a convenient product, and customers are accustomed to uniform and takeaway focused experiences. In contrast, Australian cafe culture places greater emphasis on relational and contextual communication. Meaning is created through social interaction, informal conversation, and ongoing relationships with skilled baristas. Coffee functions as a social ritual rather than simply a product. Because Starbucks did not adapt its communication style to these expectations, Australian consumers experienced a cultural mismatch. The standardized fast service approach felt impersonal and overly corporate, limiting emotional connection and customer loyalty. Importantly, this mismatch was not only experienced by customers but also reflected a deeper communication gap between the Australian market and Starbucks management. This leads to the organizational communication failures within the company, which Inshira will now explain. Thank you.
In addition to the cultural differences discussed by Aina, internal organizational communication failures also contributed to Starbucks' challenges in Australia. This section focuses on Starbucks' organizational communication failure, particularly the communication between the headquarters in the United States and its Australian subsidiary. So, during its expansion in Australia, Starbucks used a highly centralized top-down communication structure. Most major decisions such as store design, menu offerings, and expansion speed were controlled by the headquarters, leaving limited space for local managers to contribute. A key issue was that feedback from the Australian subsidiary was not effectively communicated upward or taken seriously. Although local managers had strong knowledge of the local market, their insights did not lead to meaningful changes at the corporate level. This reflects the presence of inter-unit silos, which refer to a situation where the headquarters and subsidiaries operate separately with limited two-way communication, causing local feedback to be ignored. In Starbucks' case, communication mainly flowed from headquarters to the subsidiary rather than being a collaborative exchange. In addition, Starbucks relied heavily on standardized corporate policies and procedures, which reduced the autonomy of Australian outlets and limited their ability to respond quickly when early problems began to appear. So, as a result, Starbucks continued expanding despite clear warning signs such as low customer interest and poor store performance. These internal communication failures prevented the company from learning from its Australian operations in time. Overall, Starbucks' failure in Australia was influenced not just by external factors but also by ineffective organizational communication, where poor coordination between the headquarters and the subsidiary limited adaptation and decision making. With these internal issues identified, Jehan will now present the strategic and organizational solutions to address these challenges.
Thank you, Inshira. To solve the challenges we have identified, I will present our multi-level solution. We are not just looking at the surface, but we are fixing the core strategy and also how the company communicates internally. So first, at the strategic level, we must move away from the standardization strategy that Zara and Aina have already mentioned. Our fix is to strategic localization. So instead of forcing the American model on everyone, we will align Starbucks values with Australia's unique specialty coffee culture. This to ensure that we respect the local market rather than ignoring it. Second, to fix the organizational level, we propose structural integration. As Inshira Hex explained, the communication between the US and Australia was broken. So we will solve this by decentralizing decision making. This means giving the Australian management more power to make their own choices and creating a direct line of communication with the US headquarters. We want to make sure that the local experts are finally being heard. Our ultimate goal is to resolve the HQ subsidiary communication breakdown for good. And now, Leah will show you the practical examples of how these changes look in a real store.
Building on the strategic and organizational features, I'll focus on what Starbucks should have done on the ground in Australia. First is the menu. Starbucks leaned too heavily on sweet, milk-based drinks which didn't match Australia's strong specialty coffee culture. Shifting towards espresso-focused options would have immediately signaled local relevance and respect for customer preferences. Second is the cafe experience. In Australia, cafes are not just places to grab coffee, they are social spaces. Starbucks' fast, takeaway-oriented model felt transactional. A more relaxed sit-down cafe environment would have aligned better with how Australians actually consume coffee. Third is barista customer interaction. Australian customers value skilled baristas and genuine engagement. Empowering baristas to interact, recommend, and customize drinks would have created authenticity instead of a scripted global experience. If these practical changes were applied, the outcomes are clear. Stronger customer connection, improved brand trust, and a better fit with the local market. To close, Starbucks failure in Australia was not about brand weakness, it was about strategic listening failure. In multinational management, global consistency creates efficiency, but local responsiveness creates acceptance. And without acceptance, even global leaders fail. That's all from us. Thank you.